to everyone who is watching this video. So before we will proceed to our discussion for today, allow us to introduce ourselves together with my partner. So my name is Laura Alexa Visumamban, a BS Environmental Science second year student.
I am Janelle Capones, a first-year student of Bachelor and Public Administration.
So today we will be discussing about the Module 7, which entitled as the Lumads Responses to Spanish Occupation. So in this module, we have 3 objectives. So what were the initial responses of the Lumads when they saw the Spaniards? What were some of the methods used by the Spaniards to subjugate the Lumads? And lastly, how did the Lumads respond to the methods mentioned above? So this module is an attempt to write the story of the hunt from the perspective of both the lions and the hunters. To achieve that aim, one may examine some of the recorded history of the articulate and find some chinks from that parchment. It is hoped that the question and answer below would lead the better understanding of the Lumads and, in particular, the response to the coming of the Spaniards. So let's proceed to the lesson proper. So here is Teodoro A. Agoncillo's quote. It will never be possible to write a real history of the Filipino people under Spain because the colonial government enjoyed a monopoly on the production of source materials. So Agoncillo is essentially saying that history is written by the winners. Since the Spanish colonial government controlled all the records and archives for over 300 years, the surviving source materials only tell their side of the story. So this creates a one-sided narrative where the actual voices, struggles, and perspectives of the Filipino people are silenced or ignored, making it nearly impossible to reconstruct a real history that isn't filtered through the eyes of the colonizers. Next is the quote of African proverb. Until lions have their own historians, stories of the hunt will glorify the hunter. So this proverb means that history is usually written by those in power, not by those who were conquered or oppressed, because the hunter or the colonizer is the one recording the story. So the narrative will always make them look like the hero, while the lion, or us, the Filipino people, is silenced. So without our own accounts of the past, we are left with a one-sided story that ignores the perspective and bravery of the victims. So on this slide shows a picture of Ronald K. Edgerton's book entitled as The Middle Ground. So Edgerton said that tribal minorities have nurtured their own sense of identity, memory, and history. So Edgerton's statement essentially means that official records aren't the only way to keep a culture alive. While powerful governments or colonizers often control what goes into the history books. So Edgerton argues that tribal minorities, like the indigenous groups in Mindanao he studied, did not just disappear into the background. Instead, they actively preserve their own truth within their own communities. Next is the William Henry Scott's book, which entitled Cracks in the Parchment Curtain. So William Henry Scott shares the optimism that one can still get some fairly clear pictures of our ancestors even from official documents of the Spanish colonial regime themselves. So William Henry Scott's idea of the parchment curtain is that while Spanish records often hide the true Filipino perspective, that curtain has cracks in it. He means that if you read between the lines of colonial documents like court cases, tax records, or a priest complaints, you can find accidental truth about our ancestors. For example, a friar complaining about stubborn pagans is actually a crack that proves Filipinos were resisting and keeping their own culture alive. Next is the Manobo epics. So we have two Manobo epics, which are the Olahingan and the Tulilangan. So there are voluminous unwritten sources of evidence from the Lumad awaiting codification and incorporation into their own history. There is, for instance, the famous Madobo epic, which is the Olahingan, a narrative that consists of the exploits of their ancestors and stories about their reverence for nature and accumulations of their neighbors. Another one is the Tulilangan, also a Ilianen Manobo, which portrays heroic deeds of their ancestors and glorification of values and forgiveness, accommodation and resilience. So these epics are not only mirrors of their past, but they also tell about what they are as a people. So what were the initial responses of the Lumads when they met the Spaniards? So Greg Hontiveros wrote that Magellan's expedition anchored near the island where they saw a fire a night before. 8 natives on a small boat called Boloto came alongside Magellan's ship in a mixture of curiosity, mistrust. So Gregorio Hontiveros or Greg Hontiveros is a beloved local historian and heritage advocate of Butuan City. So 2 balanghay boats full of men came to the mooring, and with them was the chief of the island Mazawa in a larger boat. So Magellan was actually communicating through his slave Enrique, who is believed today to be from Sumatra and was procured in Malacca when Magellan was still in the Portuguese Navy. So Enrique was able to converse with a chief who understood him well. In his chronicle, Pigafetta explained that in that country, the kings know more languages than the common people do. The Mazawa king gifted Magellan with a bar of massy gold of a good size and a basket full of ginger. So Magellan thanked him profusely but declined the gift. Magellan gave him 3 porcelain jars covered with leaves and full of rice and 2 orades, which are fairly large fish. In return, Magellan gave the king a robe of red and yellow cloth made in the Turkish fashion and very fine red cap, and to some people he gave knives and others mirrors. Pigafetta mentioned that before their separation, the king very happily kissed our hands and we kissed his. So Agoncillo pointed out that Filipino hospitality is something that is almost our fault. This hospitality has been misunderstood by many foreigners, particularly by the Spanish adventurers of the past century, who thought that such show of profuse hospitality was a form of inferiority and obsequiousness.
Good day everyone, I am Janelle Capones, and in this video I will be discussing the methods used by the Spaniards to subjugate the Lumads. So, what were some of the methods used by the Spaniards to subjugate the Lumads? Manuel Tawagon once jokingly said in his paper presentation that the Spaniards came to save our soul as if everybody was going to hell. But before getting somewhat derailed about motives in colonization, the obvious must be underscored that the principal motive of the Spaniards in coming to the islands had been plainly economic, not religious as believed by some. So, basically, the Spaniards did not just come to spread religions, they also wanted riches and control. They used Christianity to influence the people. In his book, Riddle discusses the works of Reverend Nicholas Kushner and Dr. William Henry Scott, both noted scholars of Philippine history. Kushner reveals that Spain wished a slice of coveted spice market in the area, and Scott points out that Magellan's agreement with the King of Spain was a straightforward business contract. Rodel also stresses that there was nothing at all in Magellan's instructions about spreading Christianity. The Spaniards came to the Philippines primarily for their own economic benefit and not for the native spiritual salvation or elucidation. However, by posting that they came primarily to spread Christianity, the motivational picture changes radically, the implication being that they came primarily to spiritually benefit the natives. And this simply was not true. As aggressors and colonizers, they could only be the enemy of both Filipino and Moro peoples and all the other peoples of the archipelago whom they sought to dominate against their will. The works of Kushner and Scott simply revealed the Spaniards' real intention in coming to the island, and it was not to spiritually benefit the natives but to colonize the Philippines in the least obvious way possible. The success of Spanish colonization was always attributed by historians to the zeal of the missionary and the superiority of Spanish arms. But history should not forget the divide and rule tactics used by the Spaniards. For example, in the subjugation of the Moros in southern and western Mindanao, the Spaniards made use of native soldiers recruited from the Paragans of Surigao, and moreover, the practice of Spanish explorers of befriending local chiefs. The subjugation could not be achieved without the help of native allies. The divide and rule tactic works by turning people against each other so that they can't unite. Those in power create conflicts, favor one group or another, or spread mistrust. While people are busy fighting among themselves, the rulers can control them more easily without strong resistance. In the first 2 centuries of the Spanish era, there were 3 aspects of control and governance, at times overlapping, but at other junctures clearly delineated: the civil-military government, the encomienda system, and the ecclesiastical authority. Hontiveros points out that as the Spaniards began to settle on Mindanao, they created the structure of governance in various areas that affected the Lumads. That is, the situation on Mindanao begins to have a character of its own, mainly influenced by 2 factors: the presence of the Muslim sultanates in Sulu and Maguindanao, and the transfer of the colonial capital of Filipinas from Cebu to Panay in 1568 and thence to Manila by 1571, thereby moving the center of gravity of colonial rule further north, leaving the newly converted southern communities in the backwater of colonial administration. Now, what is civil-military government? A civil-military government could be seen in how the Governor-General acted as both the top civilian ruler and the military leader. For example, while he enforced Spanish laws and collected taxes, he also commanded soldiers to suppress revolts and protect Spanish interests. This setup allowed Spain to control the colony efficiently, but it often ignored the rights and voices of the local people. The encomienda system. The encomienda system was a Spanish colonial practice where the crown granted colonists the rights to collect tribute and labor from local Filipinos. In return, the colonists were supposed to protect and Christianize the natives, but many abuses this power. During the Spanish era, it often led to forced labor and exploitation of the population for the benefit of the colonizers. And lastly, the ecclesiastical authority refers to the church's power to govern religious and moral life. During the Spanish colonial era, priests and friars controlled education, ritual, and even influenced local politics. For instance, friars could collect taxes and dictate moral rules, which often led to abuses, forced labor, and oppression of the local people. The encomienda eventually became a hated system. The most explosive of this revelation was the complaint of Father Martin de Rada to the Spanish king about the actuation of the Governor-General Guido de la Bazares. On June 21, 1574, Father Martin wrote one of the most momentous documents against the colonial officialdom addressed to King Philip II, decrying the abuses inflicted by Spanish civil and military officials on the natives in the Philippines. For as your lordship knows, we have gone everywhere with a mailed hand, and we have required the people to be friends and then on to give us tribute. At times war has been declared against them because they did not give us as much as we demanded. And if they would give us tribute but defended themselves, then they have been attacked, and war has been carried on the fire, and sword has been made to subjugate all these villages and levy tribute on them to such amount as can be secured. With what conscience has a future tribute been asked from them before they know us, or before they have received any benefit from us? And when base and foundation fail, and all that is built thereon is defective, and all the more as the Indians are not protected from their enemies, nor maintain injustice as they should be. Many piracies go on as before, and those others who are not so subject, they have given neither any satisfaction nor allowed to secure it for themselves. And there is not sufficient reason for His Majesty to have ordered that the land shall be allotted and divided into encomienda.
So next, I will be discussing about the prayers and their strategies. So they have three strategies. So firstly, they use songs as a medium to start their evangelization with the children. And second, to pray for and to try to win over those who can most help or hinder the work of evangelization. And lastly, they opened a small primary school such as in Cebu in 1595. So to form an elite corps of educated lay persons who would go back to their respective communities and become the leaders of a Christian society. So the Spanish didn't use force, so they used a very systematic approach through their missions. So their strategy was to target the children first, using schools, musics, and prayers to slowly change the culture from the roots up. So they also focus on converting the leaders or datus, knowing that if the leader changed, the rest of the tribe would likely follow. So all of this was tied together by the reduction system, moving scattered Lumad families into centralized towns. This made it much easier for the Spanish to keep track of everyone, collect taxes, and make sure they were following religious teachings. It wasn't just because about religion, but it was a way to complete the reorganized Lumad society to fit the Spanish colonial map.
How did the Lumads respond to the methods mentioned above? The story of Lumads at the coming of the Spaniards was different from the Moro-Spanish story. If the Moro would tell theirs as a narrative of relentless resistance, as they were a nation under endless tyranny, the Lumads would be a story, perhaps, of unending accommodation, for lack of better term, both to the Moros themselves and the Spaniards. They were a people who survived the scheme of different tyrants and oppressors, vulnerable as perceived by many, yet undeniably resilient. Before the advent of the Spaniards, the Lumads were already dealing with the Moros. Some of them were paying tribute for their safety, and some of them were even considered subjects. Lumad responses to the coming of the Spaniards varied also according to geographical location. The Lumads' responses in the coastal area and those in the mountains differed.
In the 16th and 17th century, Spanish missionaries and their activities in northern Mindanao were not necessarily perceived as threatening by the locals. In places like Himologon, which known now as the city of Cagayan de Oro, and Butuan, it appeared that they were simply incorporated into the existing settlements.
that many Lumads, with the notable exceptions of the Caragas, welcomed the missionaries and even chose to become Christians, demonstrated that, contrary to common perceptions, the Spaniards were not necessarily hated, nor was Christian necessarily perceived as a serious threat in the northern Mindanao area. Sources even writes that the Manugo in northeastern Mindanao behaved peacefully with the Spaniards, but that was definitely not the case with regard to the neighboring tribesmen. Moros and North Coastal Christians continued to do so despite Spanish efforts to enlist them as allies in the Christian versus Moro wars. They would slide back and forth from Puerto Totolugan, Fiesta, and Caliga, and the new god of their Jesuits padres and their old magbabaya. When exploitation from whatever quarter became tolerable, they did not mount an attack or beg for Spanish help. They retired instead to their forest heavens, abandoning the new Rido coins and driving their erstwhile Spanish mentors to despair.
So their leaders adopted titles bestowed on them by the Spaniards, such as Maestro de Campo and Capitan, but remained datus to their own people. So they would slide back and forth between Pueblo and Tulugan, Fiesta and Caliga, and the new god of their Jesuit padres and their old magbabaya. When exploitation from whatever quarter becomes intolerable, they did not mount an attack or beg for Spanish help. So in this part, I'm going to explain how groups like the Bukidnons and Manobos didn't just give up their culture. So they practiced what we call creative accommodation. Instead of rejecting everything, they took Spanish symbols and made them their own. For example, they saw the rosary and candles not just as Catholic tools, but as powerful protective amulets. They even started using Spanish titles like Maestro de Campo or Capitan for their own leaders to maintain their status while appearing to follow Spanish rules. Even the religious ceremonies became a mix. They would pray to Christian saints but treat them like their own traditional spirits, the magbabaya. It was their way to surviving and keeping their identity alive while being sandwiched between their Christian and Moro neighbors. And that would be all our discussion on Module 7. I hope this video will help you learn and gain more knowledge about our history. So thank you for listening and watching our video, and have a great day.